2024 was a fantastic year for movies. I think there have been more great films released in the last 12 months than in any other year. So to celebrate this, I'm going to talk about the worst films I saw this year. I didn't go out of my way to look for the worst films, and I don't intend to. There's plenty of films that I've probably missed, plenty of rubbish that could have ended up on this list, but it's of no interest to me to search it out. So here it is, in my opinion, the 10 worst films of 2024. At number 10 is Kraven the Hunter, directed by J.C. Chandor. I mean, was anyone actually expecting anything from a Kraven the Hunter movie? It's the last attempt of the Sony vs. Spider-Man villains arc or whatever. This film does feel in some ways unfinished, but the reason why it's so low on this list is because there's some things that I do like about it, whether it be ironically or unironically. There are some decent action scenes and some decent looking shots, which is much more than I can say about the remaining 9 films on this list. Yeah, this film is just an absolutely ridiculous corporate mess. I mean, how many fingers were in this broth? It's a movie where you have to think either were the people who were making it stupid, or do they think that I'm stupid? I think it's a good thing that the Sony Spider-Man villains universe has come to an end, because they've just been putting out nothing but slop. Like, it's just been absolute directionless, misguided stabs in the dark that aren't even fully realized, and this is one of them. This universe goes out with a whimper rather than a bang, unfortunately. At number 9 is Joker Folie à Deux, directed by Todd Phillips. I'm just so exhausted about talking about this movie, I'm going to keep it brief. It's a complete mess, and I still don't even understand what they were trying to do with it. It's a musical that fails at being a musical. They don't even capitalize on that at all, with some of the worst singing, some of the worst choreography, some of the worst pacing you've ever seen. It's just so dull and lifeless and stagnant. It has only 2 locations, and it's just constantly reiterating information that you've already seen. On paper, I like the idea of where it goes at the end, but it's not fully realized or thought out in the slightest, and it does feel spiteful. It feels very spiteful towards the audience. I don't get why this film was made or why Todd Phillips chose to make it this way. I think that's more interesting than the film itself is trying to figure out what the hell Todd Phillips was thinking. Maybe that could be a movie in and of itself, a character study on Todd Phillips' state of mind when he was writing this. Performances sucked, the pacing was just abhorrently slow, nothing happens the entire movie, and the whole movie kind of makes itself pointless by the end. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking, and I think if they just played ball, even though it would have been nerd slop, I mean, like, just have Joker fight Batman, I mean, it would have been much better than this, and it would have made money. I'm vengeance. Yeah! Then Todd Phillips could have just gone on and made whatever the hell he wanted after that anyway. This film was a complete waste of time. It's completely worthless and pointless. Don't watch it. At number 8 is It's What's Inside, directed by Greg Jardin. Oh my god, this movie is so annoying. It is the most irritating, skin-crawlingly annoying film released this year. I think this film could work as an effective method of torture. Watching this movie is like trying to fight off a hornet's nest or something, like a bunch of ants have just crawled into your bed while you're sleeping. I don't get the appeal of this movie, of having a cast of some of the most obnoxious, irritating characters who are just constantly droning over each other. Every single character is just utterly unlikable. It feels like it was written by someone who doesn't even know what an iPhone is. It's always annoying. It never stops being annoying. It's the type of movie where I watch it and I just cannot picture who is this for, who is enjoying this, who is sitting down and actually being entertained by this movie that's like nailed down a chalkboard. This is like if the Snapchat news section were a movie. Absolutely unbearable, and I had to put it on this list because of it. At number 7 is Madame Web, directed by S.J. Clarkson. I know what you're thinking. A lot of people probably think that this should be much higher on the list. I think for a lot of people this would actually be their number 1 worst film of the year, but for me, it doesn't anger me in the same way that the remaining 6 films do. This film is funny. It's probably the only film on this list that I would actually recommend. Like, I think people actually should go watch this because it's so broken and rotten to its core that It loops back around to being entertaining. I think this might be the best spiritual successor to The Room. What an embarrassing mess. I don't know how this film with so many, I guess, execs and people and producers watching over it, I don't get how it came out this amateurish, this poorly realized. I can't even come up with a simple answer of how this film came out the way it did. Like, it can't just be incompetence. It has to be a weird combination of incompetence and also laziness, but also has to be maybe a bit of apathy towards the project as well. It's a weird glimpse into the mindset of, I guess, a studio that doesn't know how to handle its own IP. Even everything down to the poster just reeks incompetence. Like, what is the face that Dakota Johnson is making on this poster? What is she thinking? Did she know that that was going to be the poster? Did she know that this photo shoot was going to be used to market the film? What was going on throughout any step of the process of making this film? I don't really think there's anything much else for me to say. It's already been burnt to a crisp by literally everyone. But yeah, I would recommend it. Go watch Madam Web. At number 6 is Borderlands, directed by Eli Roth. I've never played the Borderlands games and I don't ever intend to. I don't care how good people tell me they are, I'm never playing them. This movie is like Madame Web, where it's just a complete train wreck, but this one feels a bit more cynical. It's obviously trying to be like Guardians of the Galaxy or like a bit of Mad Max. And like when you're looking at the poster, you see this cast of characters and you're thinking, like, okay, they're gonna be having like witty banter with each other or whatever, but like half the characters don't even talk to each other in this movie. It's so disjointed. And I keep using this word, but it does feel like an unfinished movie. It does feel like this is the first draft and they forgot a few scenes and they just stitched everything together. For this type of movie, like, I can't help but compare it to Guardians of the Galaxy. But it's very simple. You just need fun characters, you need a big, expansive, colourful world for them to explore, and some action scenes and a bit of comedy. That's all you need. And this film has none of that. It just actively fails at delivering any of that. As for the big expansive world, it feels so flat and small and almost claustrophobic with how close up it's shot. The green screen effects look terrible. I would call it unacceptable. They should not have been released in this state. It should not look like this. I should not be watching this movie and thinking that it looks like a Nostalgia Critic video. For the characters, none of them are likable. The casting is weird. I don't know what Cate Blanchett is doing here. She's such a great actress. What is she doing in this slop? But then on the complete inverse, what the hell is Kevin Hart doing here? I don't even know if Kevin Hart knows what type of movie he's in. In terms of the comedy, it's so grating. It is so mind-numbingly stupid. This film stars Jack Black as Claptrap, and I think it might be my least favourite character of all time. Like, I just wanted him gone. I just wanted to kick this bucket off the screen. The movie goes on, and for like the first 15 minutes, it's already a 1 out of 10 on arrival. But then Claptrap shows up, and it somehow gets even worse. His character seems like he was just inserted in post-production. I don't think there was any thought put into where or how this character would interact with the others. Every time it cuts to Claptrap, he's always on his own. They just plopped the scene into the timeline to interject. He's insufferably irritating and does nothing but spout the most aggravating type of humour. It's like this awful mix of Reddit snark and corporate brand sarcasm. It's intolerable. This movie is a failure. It is just a complete and utter failure on every front. Any redeeming qualities it has are too small to make a dent, and yeah, I think this is one of the worst films of the year. At number 5 is Rumours, directed by Guy Maddin, Galen Johnson and Evan Johnson. Yet another Cate Blanchett movie on this list. I don't even know how she ended up in a movie even worse than Borderlands in the same year. I've already talked about this movie, so I'm just going to keep it brief. It's extremely incompetent, it looks terrible, it's kind of incoherent as to what this movie is even trying to do. It's got terrible acting, terrible production. It should not have been made. I don't think, like, what was even the point of any of this? It doesn't really have a reason to exist. It squanders its potential. It could have been a much smarter satire given the subject matter of it being about the G7 summit. I don't even know if there's anything new I could say. Yeah, it's terrible. It deserves to be in the bottom 5 of the year. Yeah, don't watch it. Like, really, just do not watch it. Do not let curiosity get the better of you. This film is not worth it. At number 4 is Rebel Moon. The second one, I don't remember the title. Directed by Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder released 2 Rebel Moon movies, one at the end of 2023 and one at the very start of 2024. So they were released in quick succession of each other, and they kind of blend together in my memory, so apologies if I can't really recall any details. about this film. It's going to be tough talking about this film because I can't really separate it from the other movie in my mind. Where do I begin? It's just Zack Snyder doing what he's always been doing. This movie is ugly. It is one of the most hideous, repulsive looking films of the year. The whole thing is just an eyesore, just on every level, from the design, the color palette, the awful CGI effects. Every character is boring. There's not an interesting character to be found. Nothing they do or say is interesting. The whole thing is just an homage to Star Wars, as if that franchise needs any more references at all. Like get over it. Can we just move on from Star Wars, please? Can we just do something new? Again, like Borderlands, I would call this film a failure. It just doesn't work on any level. Like, it's not really something that anyone can watch and be entertained by. It's not anything someone can watch and be inspired by. As far like a sci-fi action film, I mean, you could just pull any old like Tom Cruise film off of Amazon Prime or Netflix or whatever and you'd have a much better time. This film is non-stop misery. It's so miserable. It has the tone of a funeral. Zack Snyder does not grow or change or develop as a filmmaker at all. He's just been constantly churning out the same stuff over and over again. If this had Batman in it, yeah, this would be on like the IMDb top 250. I think most people know already anyway to just avoid Zack Snyder's movies because they're always an insufferable waste of time, and I pray for the day when he actually gets his stuff together and moves back to something a bit more fun and vibrant like his earlier stuff. This movie feels like it was written by Reddit. There isn't a single moment of joy to be found in this thing. It's something you put on if you just want to, torture yourself for, how long is it? 2 hours? Yeah, don't watch it. At number 3 is Unfrosted, directed by Jerry Seinfeld. When I saw this movie, I was convinced that it was going to be my number 1 worst film of 2024. So imagine my shock when I got not one but 2 films that are somehow worse than this thing. This film is trying to be like a satire, kind of, but it doesn't really translate well, and you kind of have to like squint your eyes and tilt your head to see the satirical elements coming through, because it doesn't really differentiate itself between being a satire or just being soulless, evil corporate propaganda. The jokes are absolutely bottom of the barrel, lazy, thoughtless, kind of insultingly piss poor. I don't even know where to begin with this film because it's almost like you could just throw a dart at it and it'll land on something terrible. Jerry Seinfeld is terrible in the lead, like an absolutely terrible performance. The whole thing looks awful, and it was shot by Bill Pope for some reason, I think. Yeah, why did Bill Pope shoot this? It's just non-stop references to other brands and the corporate spew. It just sounds terrible, it looks terrible, it's awful to watch. It turns into a straight up advertisement like halfway through it anyway, where they're just eating cereal for no reason. Such an uninspired, lazy, incompetent film. I would call this soulless, I would call it evil. Whatever happened to Shame? There should have been some hesitation into making this film, but it seems like he just dove headfirst into it. If there ever was a crime against comedy and film and art, it would be this film. At number 2 is Red 1, directed by Jake Kasdan. This film cost $250 million to make. That's $250 million. Think about how much good in the world $250 million can do, and instead we get Red 1. Watching this movie is like watching money burn. They might as well have just flushed it down the toilet. It would have been better spent that way. The film stars Dwayne Johnson, who has possibly the most fragile ego out of anyone working in Hollywood right now, because every single film that he's in does nothing but promote how much of a badass he is. And I think that it's kind of inevitable that a film like Red 1 will be made, because he's on a roll. He's in box office hit after box office hit, where he just plays himself the whole time, and he's just such a badass. He's so strong. And I think it would get to your head, it would warp your perception of reality, it would make you live in a bubble. When you get like that, you are eventually going to make a film for too much money with such little quality, and you making it sees nothing wrong with it, and you think it's going to be a success. I mean, the sheer arrogance of everyone involved to think that this would be acceptable, to release a film of such piss poor quality, of such lazy writing, such lazy execution. Something that shouldn't have even cost $50 million, let alone $250 million. To release that and not expect outrage, I think is delusional. It looks terrible. It reeks of ego and arrogance and self-importance for the actors themselves. It feels like it's overcompensating for something. I think it's probably the most insulting film released this year, mostly because of that obscene budget. I think Hollywood really needs to rework how it finances its movies, because think of the profit margin. Think of how much money this thing needs to make just to break even. Did they seriously think that this was going to make $1 billion? Absolutely not, when it has some of the most repulsive character designs I've ever seen. When it's shot like a feckin' sitcom, when it's just terrible performances and there's absolutely no inspiration to be found in anything. Absolute brain-dead slop that's used to put you further into a coma. This film's intended way of being watched is to have it on in the background while you just scroll through your phone or fall asleep. It's completely worthless. It's not for anyone. Nobody is going to watch this and have a good time. Nobody's going to watch this and feel stimulated. As low as the bar is for Dwayne Johnson's output, he can do so much better than this. And so can Jake Kasdan, everyone involved. Absolutely embarrassing, totally unacceptable, utterly insulting. Get this thing out of here. This should not have been made. With $250 million, yeah, Hollywood deserves to have like an audit or something right now, because I think the government should interfere when that much money is being played around with and is set alight for a movie like Red One. It's frustrating because, you know, you look at films like The Brutalist, think about how much quality and substance you can get when you just have like not even a fraction of Red One's budget. So yeah, I feel comfortable putting this as the second worst film of the year. And so here we have it, my number one, the worst film of the year. It has to go to Megalopolis, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. This is the most incoherent movie ever made. Like, not in a challenging Mulholland Drive, Last Year in Marion bad way, but rather in a way where the entire film feels like a compilation of deleted scenes. It makes you appreciate even the most terrible of films by comparison. Like, at least Kraven the Hunter had characters and a plot and a conflict and varying tones. This film is so broken and rotten right to its core that it's difficult to articulate why it doesn't work. Everything is wrong with it.
So go back to the club.
It's almost redundant to explain what is wrong with this film, because I shouldn't have to explain it to anyone. This isn't experimental. This isn't Coppola coloring outside of the lines. This is Coppola failing at basic storytelling. Calling this film a mess feels too polite. The word wreckage seems to be more appropriate. Nothing happens in the entire film. It is utterly tone deaf and it gets tedious very quickly. None of the characters are interesting or relatable in the slightest, so there's zero emotional impact to anything. With this story being about an architect building a utopian city, you don't really get to see him build much of anything. He never has to worry about material costs, labor, etc. That would be too interesting for this film, because he has a magic flubber material that can do anything. The actual conflict stems from a political debacle between this architect and the mayor, which gives major PTSD flashbacks to the prequel trilogy, except somehow even more boring and incompetent. The story is as stagnant as the visuals, with horrendously ugly CGI and green screen throughout. A lot of it looked cheap and fake. To say that this looked like a Nostalgia Critic video would be an insult to Doug Walker. Most of this film is set in sterile marble ballrooms and bank lobbies, meaning there's very little variation in terms of setting. I think this was meant to be a satire. In one moment you'll have some of the most painfully obvious metaphors imaginable, and in the next moment you'll be bombarded with incomprehensible drivel. Someone will sign the almighty dollar, but then Adam Driver will say something like, "Who isn't attracted to women?" Speaking of weird attitudes toward women, nearly every single female character is over-sexualized, especially Aubrey Plaza. It comes across as gratuitous and even perverted with how heavy-handed it is. This film includes the highly questionable casting of Shia LaBeouf, who might be the worst thing ever. He brings a tremendously unpleasant screen presence, and I hated looking at him. Like many other Shia LaBeouf performances, he tries so hard to be a serious, professional actor, but comes across as a masturbatory clown.
La 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 la, this and that.
There's a musical number in this that made me want to tear my eardrums out through my nostrils, and it's a mawkish, overproduced song with unbearable singing in cursive vocals. Thankfully, I didn't have to listen to it for long, because this film has the absolute worst sound mixing. The song abruptly quietens down, despite still still being the center of attention, so that characters can awkwardly speak over it. It was jaw-droppingly amateurish, and I've never seen something like that from a film released in cinemas. This is an exceptionally awful film on just about every level. It is an 138-minute long endurance test. About 5 or 6 people walked out of the screening I was at, and they were dead right to do so. This is something you'd show to someone as a prank. If I was locked inside a room with this film playing, there would be claw marks on the door. To sit through this film from start to finish is an Herculean task. Unwatchable doesn't even begin to describe how torturous this pretentious, incompetent train wreck is. And because of that, I think it is deserving as the worst film of 2024.